At my son's wedding, they seated me next to a trash can. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean an actual trash can, right by the kitchen door. I was wearing my best lavender dress. I'd brought a gift, wrapped carefully, and even baked Brandon's favorite banana bread. But when I walked into the reception, my place card was taped to a fold-out chair, sitting next to a steel bin that smelled like shrimp tails and warm beer. His new wife laughed. My son didn't even look at me. Something in me cracked open in that moment. My name is Elaine Carter. I'm 62. I raised that boy on my own for more than 20 years. I never thought I'd say this, but that wedding gave me something, a strange kind of gift. Because just 2 weeks later, I found out the baby they called my grandson might not even be Brandon's. And once I knew the truth, I stopped trying to earn a seat at their table. I built my own. Would you have stayed silent if it had been you? Let me tell you what happened. The room smelled like roast chicken and wine. There was music playing, soft and jazzy, the kind meant to feel fancy. Lace centerpieces, gold-trimmed menus, all the little touches that say elegance, but none of it felt real. I stood there holding the banana bread with both hands, not sure where to put it. A server glanced at me, then pointed toward the buffet. So I walked over and set it down beside some trays of catered hors d'oeuvres that already looked tired under the heat lamps. Eventually, I found my name scribbled in fading gold ink on a place card. It was scotch-taped to a wobbly folding chair. I looked around, hoping it was a mistake, and caught the eye of a young waiter. I whispered, "Excuse me, I think something's off here." He just blinked, shrugged, then walked through the kitchen door. That same door kept swinging open every few minutes, letting out steam and shouting from the catering crew. But I sat down anyway. What else could I do? I wasn't going to cause a scene at my only child's wedding. After dinner, Chelsea made a toast. Her voice was sharp and a little too loud through the microphone. She said, "To love, to laughter, and to letting go of old traditions to make room for new family." People laughed. Brandon smiled. But it wasn't the smile I knew. Not the one from school concerts or when he'd blow out birthday candles in the backyard. This one barely touched his eyes. I stayed in my seat while everyone danced. First Chelsea and Brandon, then Chelsea and her mother, who wore a navy silk dress and a diamond necklace I remembered from an old Facebook post. Brandon twirled her around, kissed her cheek. I held my breath. No one asked me to dance. I just sat there, smiled at anyone who looked my way, folded my hands in my lap, watched the tablecloth. And I started thinking about all the nights I stayed up when Brandon had asthma, the birthday cakes I baked from scratch, the hand-me-downs I spent hours mending to make look new again. Then I reached into my purse. My fingers touched an envelope. Inside it was a card I'd written by hand, and the ultrasound photo Brandon had sent me 6 months earlier. He'd written, "Your first grandchild," in blue ink. Back then, I hadn't thought twice about the timing, not until later. As the night wound down, I gathered my things. No one stopped me. No one walked me out. But as I passed behind the sweetheart table, I heard Chelsea's voice, quiet but clear. She said, "That seat suits her." I didn't stop, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger, not sadness either. It was resolve. Because if they thought I belonged next to beer cans and shrimp shells, then they were about to see who I really was. And by the time Chelsea's baby shower came around, I already had questions. Something didn't line up. The timing, the belly, even the name. But we'll get to that. If you've ever felt pushed to the edge of the room, or like someone forgot how much you gave just to be noticed, maybe you'll understand why I'm sharing this. I'm not looking for pity. I'm just done letting silence smooth things over. So tell me, what would you have done if the people you loved made you feel invisible? Leave me a comment. I read every single one, even the quiet ones. And if this story feels like it echoes something in your life, go ahead and hit subscribe. There's more to come. Next time, I'll tell you about a baby shower that didn't feel like a celebration at all. And wait until you hear what she named him. They thought I'd forget. You know, the way older folks are supposed to. Like memories just fade away, get soft like a loaf of bread left out too long. But I've always remembered the things that matter, especially the ones that don't quite make sense. Chelsea's baby shower looked like something straight out of one of those lifestyle blogs she follows. Everything was done in baby blue and soft yellow, laid out so perfectly it felt unreal. Matching straws, cookies shaped like rattles, a giant balloon arch at the entrance. And someone, I still don't know who, had hired a violinist to play lullabies. In June, on a rented patio. Honestly, it felt more like a magazine shoot than a family gathering. I stood there holding a little gift bag. It looked small, but it carried so much of me inside it. I had sewn a quilt, pale lavender and cream, hand-stitched over 6 long weeks, even though my hands don't last more than 20 minutes these days. I had planned every single square, even added a heart-shaped patch, stitched with the baby's name in soft gray thread. It said, Noah. Chelsea smiled for a photo when I handed her the bag. Then, just like that, she passed it off to someone else without even looking inside. She chirped, "Oh, thank you," and went back to unwrapping another gadget from her registry. Someone nearby gasped over a fancy bottle sterilizer. I stood there gripping the strap of my purse. My hands were shaking, though I didn't know why just yet. Later, when they started serving cake, this tall, blue ombre thing with gold flakes on top, I leaned in toward Brandon and asked softly, "When's Noah due again?" He blinked and said, early August, I think?" Chelsea was walking by with a tray of cake. She jumped in and said, "Late July, actually. Right, babe?" She was smiling too hard. Brandon laughed a little and said, Yeah, late July. That's what I meant." But I remembered clearly. Back in January, Chelsea showed up on our porch, practically glowing, said she was 2 months along. I'd written it down in my planner because she made such a show of it. And now it was barely 6 months later, and she was waddling like that baby was ready to show up any day. I sipped my punch and tried not to stare. Inside the house, on the mantel, there was a little display. Brandon's baby pictures were lined up next to a sonogram of Noah. I tilted my head. Brandon had chubby cheeks, a little button nose, but the sonogram? That baby had a sharper face, long fingers. Maybe I was just seeing things. But then, something happened that still stuck in my head. Someone handed Chelsea a tiny ivory onesie trimmed in lace. It had tiny embroidered letters on the front, NL. Everyone around her let out this soft little gasp. Chelsea's smile flickered for just a second. Then she said, "Oh, that's a mistake. It's supposed to be NB, Noah Benjamin. They must have messed up the monogram." I blinked. "L?" I asked, quiet. "Not Liam?" She turned toward me, her voice syrupy sweet. "Of course not," she laughed. No, that's not it." But her eyes, they weren't smiling. That night, I drove home alone. The quilt sat untouched in the back seat. I didn't turn on the radio, just the hum of the engine and that faint vanilla smell from Chelsea's lotion still on my hands. When I pulled into the driveway, I didn't get out right away. I sat there with my eyes on the mirror and whispered to myself for the first time, "Something's off." A few hours later, I climbed up into the attic and found Brandon's baby scrapbook, that old sun-faded book from 1992. I flipped through until I landed on his birth stats, 8 pounds, 10 ounces. And for some reason, that number stuck with me. I didn't know why yet, but it felt like a loose thread, and I was ready to pull. When you've spent your whole life being polite, people forget that you can still be dangerous. I wasn't looking for revenge. What I wanted was clarity, the kind that lets you lay your head down and actually sleep. So I made a phone call that had been sitting in the back of my mind like a tune I couldn't quite remember. "Margaret," I said when she picked up, "it's Elaine. Are you still in that little bungalow on Sycamore?" An hour later, I was standing on her porch with a tin of banana bread and a stomach full of nerves. She opened the door wearing a crisp blouse and linen pants. Her silver hair was pinned back, neat as ever. She smiled and said, "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Then she stepped aside to let me in. The smell hit me right away, lemon bars and wood polish. Comforting, like a song you haven't heard in years, but somehow still know the words to. Her house hadn't changed a bit. The same soft vinyl was spinning on the turntable, a fan creaked overhead, and along one wall, those file cabinets were still standing like quiet little guards. I followed her into the kitchen. She poured iced tea into 2 mismatched glasses, and I started with small talk. The weather, her garden, her knees. She listened without rushing me, just tapping her fingers lightly on the glass. Then I stopped pretending. "I think Noah might not be Brandon's." She didn't blink, just raised an eyebrow and set her glass down slow. "Go on," she said. So I did. I told her everything. The rushed announcement, the onesie with the wrong initials, how Chelsea's story kept shifting every time I tried to hold on to it. I pulled a notepad from my purse, the one I'd stuffed full of dates and scribbled memories. Margaret didn't say a word until I finished. Then she reached into a drawer and slid a yellow legal pad across the table. "Let's make a list," she said, grabbing a pen. We started mapping it out. Dates, doctor visits, due times. She even wrote down hospital names, pediatricians, daycare centers. She glanced at me and said, "This is all hypothetical, of course," then gave me a wink. And I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. I took a sip of tea and said, "I still remember that story you told, the one about the woman who found lipstick on her husband's collar and how you traced it back to her best friend." Margaret chuckled. "Never underestimate an old woman with time and curiosity." Then her voice got quiet again. "If we want answers, we need DNA. Best case, from Noah. Hair, saliva, a pacifier, something clean." I paused. My hand drifted down to my purse. I reached in and pulled out a Ziploc bag. Inside was a small blue pacifier, the kind with tiny stars printed on it. Noah had dropped it under the couch last week when I visited. I'd picked it up, meant to give it back, but somehow I hadn't. "Will this help?" I asked, barely above a whisper. Margaret held it up to the light and smiled. "Oh, yes," she said. "This will do nicely." I looked around her living room. My eyes landed on a handmade quilt draped over the couch. It was the one Chelsea never opened. I'd brought it here the last time I stopped by, just hoping someone might actually see it for what it was. Margaret had laid it gently across the armrest, like it belonged. As I stood to leave, she touched my wrist. Her voice was steady. 2 weeks, she said. "You'll have your clarity." And I believed her. Margaret said 2 weeks. It only took 10 days. She greeted me at the door with that same quiet calm. She was wearing an oatmeal-colored cardigan and soft slippers that barely made a sound on the floor. I followed her into the kitchen. The air smelled faintly like apples and something warm I couldn't quite name, maybe cinnamon. There was an envelope on the table, plain white, ordinary looking. Could have been coupons or a recipe clipped from a magazine, but I knew it wasn't. Margaret didn't make a big deal of it. She poured coffee into 2 mugs and slid the envelope across the table like it was just part of our usual afternoon. "Here you go," she said, like it was nothing. "Arrived this morning." I just stared at it. My hands hovered over the paper. They were damp, shaky. The afternoon light was pouring through the window, laying golden streaks across the floor and her cabinets. Outside, yellow leaves scraped against the glass, this soft sound that made everything feel even quieter. Finally, I picked it up, opened the seal slowly. The letter inside was short, cold, clinical. Probability of paternity 0.00%. I read it 3 times before I could breathe. Everything from the past year came crashing down. Chelsea's rushed announcement, that baby shower with the color-coordinated decorations, and all those fake smiles, the onesie with the wrong initials. I had wanted so badly to believe I was just imagining it, that Chelsea was forgetful, that Brandon was distracted. But here it was, in writing. Noah wasn't Brandon's. I let the letter drop onto the table. My hands were shaking. I reached for my coffee, but it was already cold. Margaret didn't say a word. She just waited, still and steady. After a while, she asked me, "What do you want to do with this?" I looked down at the letter again, folded it slowly into thirds, pressed the creases down, slid it back into the envelope like it was something sacred, or maybe dangerous. "Save it," I said. "We'll need it." Margaret nodded once. That was all. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but the tears never came. Instead, something sharper settled in, a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. I stood up, smoothing my coat over my arms. Margaret didn't ask questions, didn't try to stop me. She just handed me the envelope. I slipped it into my purse like it was a secret I didn't want to touch. The drive home was quiet. The envelope sat on my lap. I could feel the corners pressing into my skirt every time I turned. And I thought about Brandon when he was little, the way he used to hold my hand in the grocery store, his cheeks sticky from a lollipop. I thought about the first time I held him, about all the years I spent dreaming of the father he'd grow up to be. And then I thought about Chelsea, how she had looked me in the eye so many times and lied. At a red light, I whispered to the windshield. They lied to me, both of them. Then I said it again, louder. Not anymore. Not anymore. If you've ever had that moment where your gut told you something was wrong, even when everyone around you smiled like nothing was, then maybe you understand what I felt driving home that day. I know I'm not the only one who's been lied to by people they loved most. Maybe you've been there too. So tell me, have you ever ignored a red flag because you just wanted to believe the best in someone? Leave me a comment. I'd really like to hear your story. And if you want to find out what I did next, stay with me. It only gets messier from here. You might want to hit that subscribe button, just so you don't miss what comes next. Chelsea invited me over for dinner the week after the test results came in. She sent a cheerful little text, threw in an extra exclamation point, like she thought we were still pretending everything was fine. I brought an apple pie, made it from scratch. It was my mother's recipe. The crust came out golden, and the filling was warm with cinnamon. Chelsea opened the door, took the pie with both hands, gave this tight little smile, like she was trying not to flinch, and said, "Oh, thanks. We already have dessert, but I'll save this for later." I didn't take off my coat, not right away. The house smelled like rosemary chicken, but under that, I caught something faint, the sour trace of a dirty diaper someone hadn't tossed yet. Brandon was already at the table. His sleeves were rolled up, and his face looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Noah was napping, Chelsea said. Her voice was too cheerful. She poured me a glass of red wine without asking. Dinner was civil, that's the word I'd use. Music played low from a speaker on the counter, some jazz pianist I didn't recognize. Brandon barely said a word, just nodded here and there. Chelsea kept the conversation going like she was hosting a cruise, talked about the church fundraiser, the neighbors' Halloween decorations, anything but family. The food was good, I'll give her that, but what caught my eye wasn't the rosemary chicken or the tablecloth. It was the bowl of baby carrots. Soft blue ceramic, a small chip near the base. I knew it the moment I saw it. I gave that bowl to Brandon when he left for college. I'd wrapped it in newspaper, tucked in a little note that said, "For your midnight cereal cravings." Seeing it now, filled with carrots and careful conversation, made my chest tighten. Halfway through the meal, I glanced at a framed photo of Noah sitting on the buffet. His eyes were bright, round, and something about them looked too familiar. I took a sip of wine. Then, casually, I looked toward Chelsea. Noah's eyes remind me of Liam's graduation photo, I said, like I was just remembering an old yearbook. Her fork paused in the air, just for a second. Then she laughed. "Oh, you think so? I guess all babies look alike at this age." Brandon looked up, blinked, went back to his chicken, and that's when I saw it, the carrot spoon. It was lying on the table beside the peas. A tiny silver spoon with a little cartoon carrot at the end of the handle. It was part of Brandon's childhood cutlery set, a gift from my sister. I hadn't seen it in years. I picked it up slowly, turned it in my fingers, let the light catch the edge of the engraving. Then I placed it down, firm but quiet, right next to Chelsea's wine glass. She followed my hand with her eyes. Then she asked, "Is there something on your mind?" I smiled. "Not yet." She was the one who looked away first. I didn't finish my wine. I didn't ask for dessert. But I stayed just long enough to make it clear. I wasn't blind anymore. She thought silence meant surrender. She forgot what mothers can remember. 2 days after that dinner, I found a cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. It was thick and overly formal, the kind you usually get with wedding RSVPs or legal notices. Chelsea always loved things that looked official, even when they weren't. Inside was a glossy printed card. It said, "Join us to celebrate Noah's first steps." I almost laughed out loud. There was something so desperate about it, like even baby milestones needed a theme now. But that was Chelsea, all about the look of things, the perfect bows, the perfect captions, the perfect lies. The party was in early November at a rented event space downtown. One of those boutique venues with white walls and exposed brick, the kind of place people book for networking mixers or retirement brunches. Outside, the wind was pushing dry leaves across the sidewalk. I wore my wool coat and carried a small gift bag. The tissue paper inside was folded so neatly it felt like armor. Inside, the room was covered in white tablecloths and gold balloons. There was a long table with charcuterie boards, cookies shaped like little number ones, and a tall tiered cake that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. Chelsea was already working the room, floating from group to group in a cream-colored dress. Her hair was curled, her lipstick a little too perfect. She looked like a hostess from a reality show. Brandon stood near the drinks table. He was holding a soda and scanning the crowd like he was hoping to disappear. Someone guided me to a small table near the back. Not asked, just quietly directed. It was close to the exit, far from the cake, far from the gifts. When Chelsea finally grabbed the microphone to give her little speech, her voice floated through the Bluetooth speakers like sugar. She said, "Every step Noah takes is a step forward for our family. He's our little light, and we're just so proud of every wobbly little moment." People clapped, cameras flashed. I looked down at the floor. Then I looked at Noah. He was toddling across the rug toward a balloon. His cheeks were round and pink, the ends of his hair curled just slightly. And his eyes, those deep brown eyes, mirrored another pair I had seen years ago, in a graduation photo taped to Chelsea's fridge. Brandon saw me watching. He stepped a little closer and asked softly, "Everything okay, Mom?" I smiled. I'm just watching him walk into the truth. Brandon frowned a little. He didn't understand, but he didn't press. I reached into my purse and adjusted a napkin, just enough to reveal the edge of a folded envelope. The DNA report was tucked right underneath, clean, concise, undeniable. It felt heavier than paper. I started walking slowly through the room, past trays of tiny pastries, past glittering party favors. Near the dessert table, there was a hand-lettered sign. It said, "Thank you for coming." I stopped, let my eyes follow each curve of the ink. Then I whispered, "Not yet, but soon." When I turned back, Chelsea was looking straight at me from across the room. Her smile slipped, just a little. I didn't look away. I let her see it, let her feel it, let her know that I hadn't said everything, but I hadn't said nothing either. Not yet. Sometimes staying quiet is the loudest thing you can do. That day, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene, but I know she felt it. That shift, that weight. Have you ever been in a room full of people and still felt completely alone with what you knew? If you've ever had to bite your tongue while someone smiled through a lie, I'd love to hear how you handled it. Leave me a comment, even just one sentence. And if you're wondering what I'm going to do next, you're not the only one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it. Because the truth, it always shows up. And when it does, it doesn't knock. I hadn't planned on bringing a gift. After the last party, I told myself I wouldn't play along anymore. But that morning, while I was clearing out the hallway closet, my fingers brushed against something soft under a stack of old dish towels. I pulled it out, and the moment I saw it, I knew. It was the same kind of baby book I used for Brandon. Pale yellow cover, tiny silver stars along the spine, still wrapped in its cellophane. The ribbon had faded, but it was still tied. The light outside was dim, that kind of gray that makes everything feel paused. I carried the book into the kitchen and set it down on the table. The kettle clicked. I poured myself some cinnamon tea. The steam curled up from the mug, but my hands stayed steady. I peeled off the plastic and opened the cover. The first page said, "Welcome, little one." I hadn't touched that copy since the day I bought it, back when Chelsea first announced the pregnancy, back when I thought I'd be part of Noah's milestones. Next to it, I brought out Brandon's baby book. The spine let out a soft little crack when I opened it. And there he was, my son. Grainy photos, my handwriting, neat and careful. First smile, 3 months. First word, truck, 9 months. First fever, April 1992. I'd called the pediatrician at midnight. My handwriting looked younger back then, rounder, more hopeful. I turned the pages slowly, like flipping through a life I once held in my arms. And then it hit me. One book full of memories, full of effort, full of love. And the other completely empty. Not because the baby didn't deserve it, but because I was never invited to fill it. I slid the blank baby book a little closer. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the DNA results, still folded, still sharp. I tucked the paper into the inside pocket of the book's cover. Not hidden, not loud, just placed. Then I turned to the first page and wrote one sentence in pen. "Truth belongs here too." That was it. I wrapped the book in brown paper from the drawer, the kind you use to cover school books. I tied it with a yellow ribbon, the same soft yellow I used in Brandon's nursery decades ago. Gentle, but impossible to forget. The phone rang. It was Margaret. "You ready?" she asked. "Almost," I said. We didn't need to say what for. She already knew. I stayed in the kitchen for a while after that. The late light was coming in through the blinds, laying quiet little stripes across the table. The wrapped book sat in the center, still, certain. No fireworks, no shouting, just clarity. Brandon's baby book was still open beside me. I reached out and traced one of the old Polaroids with my finger. His second birthday, frosting on his nose, my sister in the background wearing a crooked paper party hat. That little boy had trusted me to protect his world. Now I had to protect his future, even if he ended up hating me for it, at least for a while. I looked over at the package. There was no anger in my chest anymore, just air, still and cold. I leaned down just a little, and I whispered, Let them unwrap it. I'm done explaining. And I meant it. They hired a photographer this time, rented neat rows of white folding chairs. There was even a little guest book on the table, already half filled with notes written in glitter pen. Messages like, "He's such a joy," and "What a little blessing." But once again, there wasn't a seat for me. No place card with my name, no simple Elaine written in cursive. Just blank chairs scattered around, like I wasn't really supposed to be there. So I picked one myself, front and center. Same hall they used for the wedding. Same artificial air freshener scent. Same buzzing lights hanging above the cupcakes and the rented flower arrangements. 15 months had passed, but my feet still remembered where I'd stood that night. The trash can was still there too. Maybe newer, but in the same spot. It didn't matter. I wasn't sitting next to it again. I got there early. I slid the wrapped baby book onto the gift table. The yellow ribbon rested flat against the brown paper. Quiet, unassuming. No one noticed when I chose my seat. Second chair from the front, center row. But a few people did notice when I stayed in it. Even after Chelsea's cousin came over and gently suggested I might be more comfortable near the refreshment table. I smiled and said, "No thank you, I'd like to see clearly today." By the time the room filled, I was already settled. A slideshow played behind the cake table. Pictures of Noah on a blanket, Noah in a swing, Noah with frosting on his cheeks. Chelsea's voice drifted from the speakers as the images looped. When she stood up to make her toast, she held a glass of sparkling cider like it was champagne. She said, "We're just so grateful to the village that's helped us raise our perfect little boy. Every step he takes is a step forward for all of us." The room clapped. I didn't. I sipped my water. Noah toddled across the floor, chasing 2 balloons. Brandon crouched to catch him. His tie was crooked, his eyes kept flickering. Chelsea hovered just behind him, adjusting her necklace. Then came the gifts, a pile of pastel bags and crinkled tissue paper, onesies, books, tiny sneakers. She opened each one with a practiced smile, held them up for photos, thanked the room. Then she reached mine. She picked it up slowly, turned it over in her hands. Her fingers paused on the ribbon. Brandon leaned closer and said, "Open it." So she did. First the paper, then the yellow book. She smiled, just a little too tight, and flipped open the cover. Her eyes moved across the inside flap, then stopped. Her hand froze. The rest of the room didn't notice, not yet, but I did. I saw the way her chest pulled tight, the way she shifted her weight, the way her mouth pressed into a line. Brandon leaned in to look, his brow knit together. Inside the pocket was the DNA report. Neat, folded once, sitting quietly where I left it. Chelsea closed the book, snapped it shut. I stood, quietly. I smoothed my coat. No one said a word as I stepped into the aisle. I stopped only once, right beside the trash can. The same one they sat me next to last year. I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. I looked at them, just once, straight through them. And I said, soft enough to carry, but not loud enough to echo, "Now you both know." Then I walked out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. But sometimes the loudest thing you can say is choosing not to stay silent. If you've ever had to stand your ground quietly, painfully, in front of people who once called you family, then maybe you know what that moment felt like. Have you ever walked out of a room knowing you left the truth behind for someone else to deal with? I'd love to hear what gave you the strength to do it. Leave a comment. I'm listening. And if you're wondering what happened after I walked out that door, let's just say the silence didn't last long. Hit subscribe. We're not done yet. I didn't go home right away. The door to the event hall closed behind me with a soft click, and the November wind hit my face. It was cold, but cleaner than the air I just walked out of. I got in the car. My hands were still warm from holding the baby book. I let the engine run, but didn't turn toward home. Instead, I started driving. Past the grocery store, past the bank, past anything that made sense. Downtown was quiet. Main Street always looked like it had one foot in the past, like it never fully gave in to the modern world. I parked in front of the bookstore, the one with the creaky wooden floors and those crooked shelves that always looked like they might collapse but never did. And across the street, there it was, the cafe. Green awning, a chipped window decal, the smell of roasted coffee that somehow always cut right through whatever armor I thought I had on. I walked in. The bell above the door jingled. It was a simple sound, but it meant something. It meant beginnings. It meant comfort. It meant there was a place to sit. And today, it meant all of that again. He was there, Zachary, sitting in the corner by the window, a paperback in his hands, a cup of coffee already half gone. He looked up and saw me, and he smiled like I had never left. "You again," he said. "I suppose so." He stood a little, motioned to the chair across from him. I sat down without even thinking. The barista behind the counter looked over and gave me a small nod. There was something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe? A little pity, but mostly warmth. I nodded back. We didn't say much at first. The soft jazz playing overhead, the clink of mugs, the hiss of the steamer, they filled the quiet between us. Then Zachary said, "You look different." I tilted my head. "Lighter," I said. He smiled. "That's it." He reached into a little white paper bag and pulled out a slice of lemon cake, the same kind I used to buy every Sunday, back before my son started treating the truth like it was optional. "No pressure," Zachary said, "just company." I took the plate and set it in front of me. The icing wasn't perfect. It had that uneven look that comes from someone's hands, not a factory. I picked up the fork. It tasted like spring, even in late fall. I looked at him, really looked. His face hadn't changed much, but his eyes, they had always been steady. He didn't ask about the party, didn't ask why I looked tired, or why my coat still smelled faintly of baby powder and something I didn't want to name. He just sat with me. "I missed this," I said. "Me too," he answered, like he'd been waiting. We talked, but only a little. The new bakery next door, the holiday lights going up too early. He asked if I was still stitching. I said maybe I'd pick it up again. When the sky outside turned darker and the cafe started filling up with the dinner crowd, he leaned in a bit. "So," he said quietly, "what seat would you choose next time?" I didn't even have to think. One I built myself. He smiled again, and this time it felt like an answer. I didn't expect an apology, but I also didn't expect silence. 3 days went by after the party. No calls, no messages, just quiet. The kind of quiet that used to scare me. Now it just made things clearer. Then, just after sunset on the 4th day, my phone lit up. A message from Brandon. It said, "I can explain." I sat with that sentence for a long time. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A few hours later, headlights showed up through the front window. I left the door open and waited on the porch. The light above me buzzed softly, casting gentle shadows over the steps. Dry leaves scraped along the sidewalk. The wind was picking up. Somewhere nearby, someone had a fire going. I could smell it, that mix of smoke and wood and memory. Brandon walked up holding 2 paper cups. "I wasn't sure what you still drank," he said, handing me one. I took it, but I didn't sip. Neither did he. He sat across from me on the little bench. His shoulders were hunched, like a schoolboy who knew he'd been caught cheating, but didn't know on what. His eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep, from carrying something he didn't want to face. "Chelsea said it was just a mistake," he began, "that they mixed up the test, that it doesn't mean anything." I didn't say a word. Instead, I reached into the wicker basket by the door, the one where I keep gardening gloves and coupons I never use, and I pulled out a manila envelope,
a second copy. I handed it to him, saying nothing.
He opened it slowly, like he thought it might hurt. His eyes moved over the black and white letters. His breath caught. He held the page like it might vanish if he blinked. "I'm not here to choose sides," I said quietly. "I'm here to stop pretending." Brandon swallowed hard. He still wouldn't look at me. "You were right," he said, "about the onesie, the dates. I just didn't want to see it." "I know." The porch creaked under us as the silence settled back in. Then his voice broke. "Did you ever stop loving me?" I closed my eyes for a second, then looked up at the early night sky. "No," I said, "but I stopped waiting for you to love me back." That was the truth, and it didn't need to be shouted. He pressed his palms to his face, elbows on his knees. His shoulders shook. I didn't reach for him. I had held him through worse, but this time wasn't mine to fix. "I don't know what to do anymore," he whispered. "Then do nothing," I said, standing slowly. "I'll be okay." He looked up at me like a boy again, not cruel, just lost. And somehow that hurt more. I turned toward the door. My hand rested on the knob. The porch light flickered once, and this time I let it. I skipped Thanksgiving, first time in 30 years. No pie crust flowered on my counter, no folding chairs dragged out from the garage, no waiting to be remembered by people who only remembered me when it was convenient. And for once, I felt full. It surprised me how quiet could fill a room. I curled up in my armchair, the one with the plaid blanket and the dent shaped just like my back, and I watched the lights flicker across the street. No parade on TV, no voices, just the soft hum of carolers in the distance and the wind pushing through brittle trees. Margaret stopped by around noon. She left a fresh wreath on my doorknob and a tin of lemon bars. She didn't knock, just waved from the sidewalk and mouthed the words, "Rest well." I nodded. She understood. That afternoon, I bundled up and walked to the corner shelter. I dropped off a tray of cookies I'd baked the night before. They weren't fancy, just oatmeal raisin, but they were warm, and somehow that felt like enough. The volunteers smiled and thanked me. They didn't know I was the one who felt grateful. Later, I wandered into a little shop downtown, a bookstore I hadn't stepped inside since Brandon was in high school. It still smelled the same, dusty paperbacks and peppermint gum. On a back shelf, tucked behind some cookbooks, I found a copy of a novel I used to love. The pages were yellowed, the spine gently cracked. I bought it without even thinking. And on the way home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I bought myself a sweater. Soft blue. Not on sale, not for anyone else. When I got home, I pulled down the old box of Christmas decorations from the hall closet. I didn't even remember what was in it. Half the ornaments still had Brandon's name scribbled on the back from when he was in kindergarten. I didn't hang them. Instead, I found a strand of white lights, plugged them in, and let them glow across the bare branches of my little artificial tree. No angels, no stars, just light. I placed one single candle beside the tree, lit it, let the flames settle. Then I sat down, exhaled, and whispered, "You did good." It wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about choosing peace, finally, instead of performance. I think there's something sacred in that, in deciding that you are enough, even without a seat at someone else's table. The room was quiet, but it wasn't empty. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Zachary. "Hot cider, snowflakes, you in?" I stared at the screen for a moment, smiled, pulled the blanket a little tighter around my shoulders. I hadn't answered yet, but I already knew. I didn't reply right away. Zachary's message had waited quietly on my screen. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't demanding. There were no blinking notifications, no countdown. I took my time, because that seat, it wasn't going anywhere.
Christmas Eve settled softly over Boise, the kind of quiet that only snow can bring, thick and slow, blanketing everything with a gentleness that even made the streetlights look kind. I pulled on my new blue sweater, the one I bought just for me, wrapped a scarf around my neck. When I stepped outside, the air smelled like pine. Something sweet drifted in from a neighbor's window. I didn't flinch. I just breathed it in. The bell above the cafe door jingled when I walked in, and I didn't enter like someone's mother or someone's burden or someone trying to earn her way into a space that never fit quite right. I just walked in, like me. The barista looked up and smiled. "You're back," she said. "I am," I answered. That was all. Warm jazz drifted from the speakers. The windows were fogged at the edges. Candles flickered on the tables, their light dancing gently across the old brick walls. And there, in the corner booth, Zachary was waiting. A cup of cider steamed in front of him. A single lemon scone sat on a napkin across the table. He stood when he saw me, gave a small nod toward the seat. "I saved it," he said. I smiled and sat down. Not because I needed someone to offer it, but because I wanted to be there. Because I chose it. We didn't rush to speak. We took slow sips of cider, letting the warmth move into our hands. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, everything felt like enough. He told me about a customer who slipped on the icy steps that morning.
She wasn't hurt, just flustered, and demanded a hot chocolate with extra dignity. We laughed. I told him about Brandon's second-grade Christmas play, the year he forgot all his lines but remembered to bow anyway. Zachary didn't ask me how I was holding up. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. And I've learned that kind of listening is a kind of love, too. Eventually, I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the window. Snowflakes caught in the glow of the streetlight. And I said it. Not to him, not even to myself. To the air, like naming it could make it real. I used to think I was just someone's mother, but I'm someone, period. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He reached for another scone and set it down on the napkin between us. Quiet offering, no pressure. A young couple came in, wrapped up in coats and joy. A baby snuggled against the mother's chest. They ordered something warm, found a table by the window. The baby laughed, one of those round, perfect baby laughs that sound like bubbles. I didn't flinch. I didn't ache. I smiled back, because this time I had my own seat, not one I was assigned, not one I was tolerated in, a seat I chose, a seat I built, and it fits me just fine. I didn't need applause when I walked into that cafe, just the comfort of a chair I chose for myself, and someone kind who saw me as whole. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, like snow on a windowsill, soft, slow, certain. Family isn't always made of those who share your name. Sometimes it's the ones who honor your heart. And maybe the most powerful thing we can do, especially as we get older, is to stop asking for a place at someone else's table and start building our own. If this story touched something in you, I'd love to hear it. Have you ever had to reclaim your worth quietly and on your own terms? Feel free to share it in the comments. Or subscribe if you want to walk through more stories like this with me. And if you're ready for another journey, the next story begins here. It's called My Daughter Laughed When I Had Nothing. Now I own a villa, and she wants me in a care home. You won't forget it.